Great, everybody. Thank you. Let's start again. So you're very welcome to today's webinar, the most underclaimed benefits and how to drive take-up. It's great to get the slides all sorted. I think you'll need them because we've got a lot to get through today. Without further ado, if I just may do a little bit of housekeeping with you. Just of all, first up, do an audio check and introduce you to the panel on the right hand side of your screen. You will be able to raise your digital hand and that tells me that you can hear me okay. So if you could just do that, thank you very much. In the same panel, that's where you ask questions of our guest speakers. So please do, as and when they occur to you during the webinar, please ask your questions there. And there's plenty of time at the end of the webinar where we will be answering those. We have a couple of polls during the webinar, so nice and interactive today, and also a short survey at the end of the webinar. And we will have you on your way. It says by 12 o'clock. Actually, it's going to be 11:30. So yeah, plenty to get through today. So today's speakers, I have my colleague Louise Murphy, Policy and Data Analyst from Policy and Practice. Louise, do you want to say hello?
Hi Janet, morning everyone.
Lovely, thank you. I have Nick Harvey, Training Officer from Folkestone and Hythe, together with Jane Worrell, Revenue and Benefits Operational Manager from Folkestone and Hythe Council. Do you want to say hello, Nick and Jane?
Morning, hello everybody.
Good morning everyone.
Thank you, that's wonderful. And finally, my colleague George Sanderson, Policy and Data Analyst from Policy and Practice. George, do you want to say hello?
Morning everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. You can all hear us and I can hear you, so that's a good start. So before I hand over to my guest speakers, for people, there's a lot of you on the call today, and for people who don't know about Policy and Practice, we're an organisation that exists to help organisations like you to give the best support that you can to help people on their way. And we do that in 3 different ways. We've got 3 different services that we do that. Our analysis of policy, which we're commissioned to do by clients. Our work is often presented as evidence to government. Most recently, Louise, in fact, was presenting to the Scottish Parliament on the benefit take-up. We also have our software, our award-winning benefit and budgeting calculator software, which is used by over 10,000 people every day. It's freely available from good.uk, and that helps people to build financial resilience. And then our low-income family tracker, which we call our LIFT, which is dashboard, which is about analytics. It's the data analytics software that we've built to help organisations unlock powerful insights from their data, and these insights help drive prevention work and indeed take-up work. And it's that we're going to be talking a lot about today. Okay, so the agenda then that we're going to be talking through. Which income-related benefits are most underclaimed? And Louise is going to talk us through, if you like, the strategy, the kind of policy context. And also she's going to be touching on Healthy Start vouchers and to understand need and take-up, and Healthy Start being one of the most underclaimed benefits that is available. And then Nick and Jane are going to talk about Folkestone and Hythe's work to drive up pension credit and tax credit take-up. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, and George is going to do some, take you through some of the software that we've developed, the LIFT and also the benefit and budgeting calculator, and talk a little bit about the ROI, the return on investment of intervention campaigns. So, you know, how do you know what works? And as I say, the software that helps you to identify vulnerability, target support, and track change. So lots to talk about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Louise to kick us off. Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, hi everyone. As Janet said, I'm hoping to basically just give a bit of background, the policy context to benefit take-up before we kind of go over to Jane and Nick, who I'm sure you're sort of all here to listen to hear about how they encourage benefit take-up. So yeah, I'll try and keep it fairly short and just give you that context. So I thought the first useful thing to do would just be to give a bit of background about poverty in the UK. And really think about, you know, why are so many organisations really focusing in on benefit take-up at the moment? And I think really the answer to that is, you know, we all agree that it's not right that so many households in the UK are living in poverty, and we want to do what we can to, you know, lift people out of poverty where possible. Some kind of more detail to that, we can see that in the last sort of 10-20 years, in-work poverty has been on the rise. So back in 1997-98, only 10% of workers in the UK were in poverty, whereas now that's up to 13%. So, you know, when we hear these kind of sound bites about record high employment, things like that, it's important to bear in mind that actually in-work poverty is on the rise. So, for example, we'll look into some of the help that is available for working households and how we can encourage take-up of those benefits. I think another important statistic to focus in on is that families, and in particular working single parents, are the most likely to be in poverty and have seen the fastest rise. So now 30% of working single parents are in poverty. So when we focus in on Healthy Start vouchers, as Janet mentioned, it's useful to bear in mind that actually these can really make a difference if so many of, you know, single parent households with young children are in poverty. And finally, I thought, given that Nick and Jane will be focusing on pension credit, it's useful to mention that although kind of historically pensioners saw kind of lower poverty rates than children and working age households, and although that is still the case, pensioner poverty rates are rising. So that kind of makes pension credit campaigns all the more kind of you know, important, basically. And kind of why that is basically that, you know, as we hear, there's, you know, growth in employment. Basically, this hasn't benefited pensioners as much as it has working age households. Hence, this rise in their poverty rates. Two policy areas that I thought it was useful to focus in on would be basically the rise in housing costs and how this interacts with the local housing allowance. And basically what that's meant is that people who are renting, especially privately, are now especially likely to be in poverty, and that for people in receipt of housing benefit who are in the private rented sector, housing benefit doesn't cover rent for most of these people. We've recently done some analysis with the local government association, and we found that the gap between the LHA rate and rent is proven to drive homelessness, and that for every 1,000 households who are experiencing a shortfall between their rent and the LHA rate, 44 of these will require temporary accommodation. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, obviously that just means these households are really at risk of being kind of pushed into crisis. And you know, we want to be able to maximise their incomes wherever possible to prevent this. But secondly, this is obviously a huge cost to councils if more and more households are becoming homeless and requiring temporary accommodation. So if it is possible to kind of encourage benefit take-up to prevent this sort of crisis, then it obviously makes sense to do so. And finally, quickly, I'm sure it's on everyone's mind, but you know, as people are migrating over onto universal credit, you know, just under a third of these will have a lower award under UC than under the legacy system. So, you know, basically, if they're eligible for other benefits as well as universal credit, it's important to make sure that they are claiming these. Secondly, if there's any sort of short-term support that people are eligible for, kind of if they are experiencing kind of issues during the transition. So for example, if they would be eligible for a DHP, it could be useful to encourage the take-up of this. And finally, there are some benefits where as people move to universal credit, we see a drop-off. So the main one being council tax support. So if people were used to claiming this alongside their housing benefit, and then when they move over onto universal credit, they have less engagement with their local council. We have seen some drop off in council tax support claims. So important to do what we can to encourage take up of this. Yeah, and just kind of very quickly, I thought this was quite a powerful graph, which is basically showing that the value of benefits has dropped fairly kind of rapidly and consistently since 2013 it sort of started, but you can see there around 2016, 2017, we really saw that big change. This is from a recent Joseph Rowntree Foundation report. And I think what that means is that, you know, even people that are claiming benefits already, the kind of value of those is sort of worth less and less. So if there are any sort of smaller types of support, which I know George will come on to talk about, things like Healthy Start vouchers, free school meals, these can make all the difference given the benefit freeze and the kind of policy climate that we're in. So I then thought it was useful to maybe just quickly talk a bit about sort of the shape of the social security system, what the benefit system as a whole looks like. So that chart on the right hand side there breaks down the number of benefit claimants by the main kind of DWP benefit groups. And I think what is quite, striking is that the state pension is by far the biggest benefit, both in terms of number of claimants and in terms of spend. And I think that can easily be forgotten. I think the media, the headlines are often about job seekers allowance, universal credit, people that are out of work, when actually, I mean, that is a tiny proportion. If you look at job seekers allowance, that is down the very bottom there. So, I'm sure most of you on the webinar kind of know this, but if we are kind of having conversations about this or thinking about benefits, I think it is useful to just set the scene, make sure that everyone's starting from the same point. And yeah, I thought then this statistic was again useful, that universal credit and the DWP benefits that it replaces, so GSA, ESA, IS and housing benefit, obviously not a DWP benefit, but I think for these statistics it was lumped in there. That makes up just a quarter of the main kind of welfare spend. So we can see pension credit and state pension are quite large sources of spending. And really, I think the point of this, as well as just sort of making sure we're all starting on the same page, is just thinking, there a lot of the policy context is sort of structural. It's out with the control of housing associations, local authorities, and I think it's unlikely that a lot more money is going to be put into basically increasing the amount of benefits that people are going to get, given the cost of rolling out universal credit, increasing housing costs, the increasing cost of disability benefits. So really all that local authorities can do is increase this take up of unclaimed benefits, and it's a tangible way to support people who are missing out. So these are some of these the overall statistics about how much is unclaimed, and it's a pretty shocking number just from these DWP income-based benefits, pension credit, income support or ESA, and then housing benefit, which again, it's sort of lumped together with these DWP benefits for the sake of the research. It amounts to £10 billion of benefits that are underclaimed. And pension credit, I think it's important to focus on, and I know Jane and Nick will follow up on this, but it's a benefit with especially low take-up rate. It's kind of assumed that about 4 out of 10 eligible households will not claim pension credit even if they are eligible for it, and that amounts to around £2,500 per year per household. Given the rise in pensioner poverty that we saw a few slides earlier, it's especially important. I think it's sort of on people's minds at the moment due to the TV licence change coming up in June, and I think that can be a really good way to engage with these households. I think we will hear from Jane and Nick at Folkestone about their plans in the coming months to engage with these households, and how kind of these events that are out with the control of the council can actually be good trigger points to engage with people. And yeah, I thought it was interesting that so much housing benefit was unclaimed. I think that can maybe be forgotten about a bit. Pension credit, I think it is, fairly known amongst people in benefits that there's a low take-up rate there. But, especially given rising homelessness and rising rents, I found that quite interesting that so much housing benefit does go unclaimed, and that's something to think about. And finally, it's not on this slide, but I thought it's useful to just talk a little bit more about council tax reduction. As I mentioned, as people are moving over onto universal credit, we are seeing a drop off here. Some data from the Scottish Government showed that between 2013 and 2019, the number of households claiming council tax reduction in Scotland fell by about 14%. We can't obviously say that this is 100% down to universal credit, but there's certainly a correlation, and we have seen similar results in England and Wales. Thinking a bit about why that might be, if people are engaging less with their local authority, they might not know about council tax support, they might not think to claim it. I think the other risk is that as different schemes, especially, well, at least in England, are changing their schemes. People might not kind of understand if they're eligible. The criteria can become more complex, and if people are moving from one area to another, they might become or eligible, even if they weren't in the other local area. So there's certainly something to think about there and how to encourage take up of council tax support. Next slide, Janet. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, we thought it would be useful to give a bit of a case study really about Healthy Start vouchers, and this is something that George, when he's showing you the software, can focus in a little bit more detail. But yeah, we started doing a little bit of research on this recently, and we're basically quite surprised at how underclaimed this was. 46% of eligible households are missing out on Healthy Start vouchers, and you can see on this chart here a breakdown by kind of the regions in England. You can see that the national picture has stayed pretty consistent here at 54% of eligible households claiming it. And then it's some fairly interesting analysis that the east of England has the lowest take-up rate compared to the northeast here, with the highest. But really, you kind of think even in the northeast, where there is that highest rate, it is only 61% of eligible households claiming it. So certainly still a lot missing out. And we see here that that amounts to over 130,000 households who weren't accessing support that they're eligible for. That's over kind of £28 million. A bit of background, I guess, in case you're thinking, you know, this is something that you're interested in. Basically, the eligibility criteria is pretty simple. It's anyone who's at least 10 weeks pregnant or with a child under 4, and in receipt of an income-based benefit should be eligible. In Scotland, it's slightly different. It's called the Best Start Foods Grant, but the eligibility criteria again is fairly similar. And I think the last thing to say about this, sort of almost linking to my previous slide, is that a lot of these kind of additional benefits, such as free prescriptions, Healthy Start vouchers, are basically like passported. So if a household is eligible for pension credit, then they're automatically eligible for a Healthy Start voucher if they have a young child. So I think that to me really just brings home the importance of encouraging people to claim these main income-based benefits. So if you get someone a claim for pension credit, not only do they get that pension credit award, which in itself is many thousands of pounds a year, but they also then get eligibility for council tax support, for housing benefit, for free school meals, for Healthy Start vouchers. So it really adds up and can be quite life-changing really for these households. And yeah, just on this last slide before I hand over to Jane and Nick, almost a bit of a segue into what they're going to talk about. I wanted to think about some of the barriers that both individuals and councils might have when approaching benefit take-up, and some opportunities. So I think at the individual level, we know that there are significant barriers. The claim process can be difficult, confusing, and when we think about universal credit, people can be put off by the digital nature of it if they're not, computer literate. And we've seen some concerns that this is affecting vulnerable households, for example, people with additional needs or whose first language isn't English. They can find this process especially difficult. There's also a lack of awareness and the sort of stigma around benefits, so people either not knowing that they're eligible or not wanting to claim. And that is, we've seen from the research, especially the case amongst pension age households. One of the biggest barriers to people taking up pension credit is people just not seeing themselves as a benefit claimant, not wanting to be in receipt of it. I thought a really interesting thing to bring out was the pilot done by DWP in 2010, where basically they automatically awarded pension credit to pensioners using their data. And although they saw that participants were happy with the government using their data this way, and they valued the extra income, it actually didn't increase take-up of pension credit. 9 months after the study, only 8.5% of the cohort involved in this pilot had gone on to make a claim for pension credit. So I think that kind of shows what you're up against, that you can go as far as actually awarding this for people and they still might not actually want to make a claim. And in terms of then kind of the barriers that councils can be up against, I think data is a big one. Lack of universal credit data. As people move on, councils don't have as rich data as they did under housing benefit. So, you know, that's a worry, and it's something that policy and practice are working with councils on at the moment. And I'm sure Janet can send some information in the follow-up if you're interested in hearing more about the work we're doing at the moment. And finally, I think the main big problem when thinking about take up is just that people who aren't claiming any benefits at all are missing from all administrative data sets. Fairly obviously, you know, you've got your housing benefit and your council tax support data set, but if people aren't claiming those, they're not in those data sets, so you can't then use that data to target them. And that's a big and consistent challenge when thinking about benefit take up. And finally, just some opportunities to try and end on a positive note. You know, you do have housing benefit and council tax support data there. They are hugely rich data sets. And although I talked about the lack of UC data, we see that around 2/3 of the UC cohort do tend to be in that council tax support data. So you do still have some information there, and that can be used. And basically that's what Jane and Nick will be talking about. We also do think that universal credit is an opportunity in some ways, in that it should increase take-up rates because it merges in work and out of work support. We're less likely to see the drop-off when people kind of move into work or out of work. And finally, the universal credit notice that comes through to local authorities can be used to increase take-up of, for example, council tax support. We work with some councils who are using this to trigger a claim. And also, for example, Glasgow City Council, we know, use data. They use their, I think it's their council tax support and housing benefit data to trigger an award of school clothing grant. So councils can use the data they have to encourage benefit take up. And yeah, that's all from me. I think we're, I can hand over to Janet for the poll now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Louise. Lots of information to take on board there, but no time to reflect because I'm going to move first over to our first poll, which hopefully you should see on your screen right now. And basically what we're asking you is, how do you encourage benefit take up now? And we're very interested to hear what activity that you might be doing. So thank you. I can see everybody voting as we speak. So yes, so how do you encourage benefit take up now? So the options that we have given you are: we don't do any benefit take up activity at all at the moment. We carry out simple benefit assessments, but no more. We send out blanket letters periodically. We use data to see who's missing out and target campaigns to those people. And then I don't know, appreciate that maybe not everybody on the call is in a position that they may know this information. So I can see the votes coming in, and I'll just leave it a little while longer. Thank you very much. That's great. Excellent. So I'm going to close the poll now because I think most people have voted, and share the results with you on screen. So very interesting. Thank you very much, everybody. So 9% of you say that you don't do any benefit take-up activity at all at the moment. The vast majority, 44%, say that you carry out simple benefit assessments, but no more. 6% say that you send out blanket letters periodically. 28% say that you use data to see who's missing out and target campaigns to them. And 14% of you are in the don't know bracket. So that's really interesting. Louise, any comments on those? Louise and George?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think it's really encouraging to see what almost 1/3 of people are using data. And I think it'll be interesting to hear about Jane and Nick. And I guess for those 44 who are doing kind of, you know, some benefit take up but not using data, it'll be useful to hear kind of how folks have kind of transitioned into a data-led approach.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Let me close this poll and then I will hand over to Nick and Jane.
Thank you very much, Janet. Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Harvey, and next to me is Jane Worrell, and we are part of the Revenues and Benefits team here at Folkestone District Council. Sorry, Folkestone High District Council, and we administer and sort out the council tax and housing benefit for our area. What I'd want to do first is just give a bit of a broad view, very, very light, about what our area is like, because some of you may know Folkestone from the Channel Tunnel, but not know much about us at all, really. What we want to say is that the Folkestone Hythe is based around the towns of Folkestone Hythe, but we also have a large rural area as well, down on the Rumney Marsh, heading out to East Sussex. We, as far as the council tax is concerned, we look after approximately 52,000 dwellings and have about 8,000 housing benefit claims. We are really a district of contrasts. We have, due to our location, we're close to the continent and close to London, so therefore we have very, very rich areas, multi-millionaires, but we also have pockets of deprivation in our urban areas as well, which obviously is what we're focusing on today. Because we're also on the south coast, we have a relatively high pension age as well in comparison to the working age population. Because we have an elderly population, we have long-term care issues and care needs that we have to budget for as well. In terms of the urban areas, we also have quite a few landlords who are controlled of large houses that have bed-fit accommodation, which is transient and low income. So we really need to have a look at those as well. A number of our residents in our urban areas, we don't have English as a first language. Folkestone has a barracks that is home to the Gurkhas, so we have a large Nepalese community that we also interact with very, very regularly. But in terms of how, so I just want to give you a bit of a broad view about what Folkestone Hythe is like, but I'll just pass over to Jane about how we got the dashboard and what we've been doing so far.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'd just like to say from the poll, if before we got the dashboard, we would have been in that 44% in as much as we did very little and very simple benefit assessments. We first saw the LIFT dashboard in a conference in 2017. I saw it and liked it and thought that was something that we could make use of, but at that time we had no funding. We returned to conference in 2018, and by that time we had managed to find some funding to purchase it. And we looked at it again, saw it was something that we wanted. We had the funds and we went ahead with our purchase. By the time we'd gone through that, and those of you that work in revenues and benefits will know that annual billing in March and April does take up an awful lot of time. We didn't actually receive our dashboard with all its data in until July last year. Very quickly after that, we realised the cut-off date for the mixed age pension credits being the 15th of August. So then our very first campaign, which turned out to be the mixed age pension credits, became a matter of urgency. So it was something which we sort of very quickly had to gear ourselves up into how we were going to deal with it. And I'll hand back to Nick to tell you how we did it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jane. What we did was we used the LIFT dashboard to identify the households in our area where there was a mixed age. So one is a pension age and one is still at working age. We then used those details, the 98 households that were identified, we then used the LIFT dashboard to prioritise them in terms of financial vulnerability, to make sure that we called the people who were in crisis or at risk first, and then moved down to the ones that were struggling and then coping. Okay. As Jane has said, because there was the reduced time frame, we didn't really have enough resource to organise a mail shot. So it was just a matter of getting 3 of our benefit personnel who understood what the claims were going through to give them a call. In terms of actions, what they did was they reviewed the claim to make sure that it was still up to date. There hadn't been any changes to circumstances that would then throw them out of the opportunity to get the pension credits. I know the policy and practice guys are looking to go onto an updated model, but at that point there was still a 3-month delay between the info we were sending over to policy and practice and us getting the dashboard back. So we needed that time just to review the claim before we actually started calling people. Okay, so we had 3 benefit personnel calling out to our contacts, the 98 households, explaining why they were calling, encouraging them to apply, not through us, through the DirectGov website. I think that's a really important point to prove that we weren't scammers. We weren't sending them a link, and we weren't asking them to do something on their computer that they wouldn't otherwise already do. We were going through a recognised website in order for them to claim what they needed to claim. And then if we made contact, brilliant, and we spoke to them and we left a message, because it was mostly mobile phone numbers that we were calling from, and we left a message if possible. One thing I would like to touch on was there have been a few concerns about Data Protection Act issues, about people almost cold calling customers in order to offer them money, not to put too fine a point on it. We never had an issue with regards to customers challenging us with regards to using their data incorrectly, or it was big government, or any of those phrases that you sometimes hear. The fact that they were already claiming benefits with us means that we already had the information anyway, and it was just helping them out. Yes, we can see that one of you is pensioner, one is working age, you may be eligible for this, please apply before this date, because you could be losing out on money here. Yeah, and then if we didn't make contact, then we set up a second chaser call as well, to try and speak to them. Yeah, so that really helped. And we had a really positive impact. Of the 98 households, by the end of the project, 51 were claiming pension credits. There was a few pushbacks in terms of they didn't want to claim, they weren't contactable, sometimes the mobile phone numbers fell out, or a change of circumstances. For example, the partner moved out, so they moved out of our area and were therefore no longer entitled. 17 said they were going to try and claim, but having reviewed their claims later on, there's no pension credits on it. So that might have been a circumstance where they might just want us off the phone to stop talking to us. And we left 4 on messages, but we've got no way of knowing whether those phones were still in contact or not, still have a signal and things like that. So as I said before, 51 households claiming pension credits. For a couple, it's £255 per week, which meant 676,000 annually brought into our district, which I think is an awesome result for what was, in realistic terms, a few afternoons by 3 benefit staff in order to call them out. I would just like to highlight one result, where one of the first people we called was a household that was identified by the Lift dashboard at risk. And they were behind in their old council tax debt, and they had liability orders. Because of the money that we were able to get for them, that cleared out the old debt, and they are now currently paid to debt for 2019 and 20. And hopefully that change in circumstances, the money that they were able to get, will help them moving forward and be able to, so it means that we've got the money, so it was to our advantage as well. But what I'll do then is I'll just pass to Jane again about the next stage of what we're doing.
So these are the other campaigns that we have already completed. We identified discretionary housing payments as an area that would help people that were struggling. So we looked at 96 lone parent cases, 44 couples with children, 32 couples with no children, and 44 singles. We always, when we target them, we always target them when we look at those at risk, struggling and in crisis. Those that are coping, if we have the resource, we will look at those, but we tend to prioritise those that we think would make the most use of getting extra money. Of the lone parents, the 96, we've had 16 apply for DHP, and 8 of those have been awarded so far. Of the couples with children, 6 applied and 4 have been awarded so far. We haven't completed the analysis on the couples with no children or the singles, and we are very much aware that our DHP income box is overflowing at the moment. We've actually had to put the team that deal with them onto overtime because there's an awful lot of people applying. We then did some work on those cases that are not in receipt of CTR, so the UC cases that were mentioned earlier. So there were 49 of those that we've looked at. We haven't had a chance to finish the analysis on those yet. And also we looked at 8 cases where the severe disability premium may well be eligible. And that was very recent. That was only in the last couple of weeks. So we haven't had the outcome for that as well. So then moving on to the overview from the benefit take-up, I'll hand back to Nick because this is his area because he does the interrogation of the system.
Certainly. Yeah, and George, jump in whenever you like with regards to this as well. This is our benefits take up in terms of what the screen, the desktop that we use in order to get the details to try and identify the customers. Jane mentioned just on the last screen that there are 8 types of severe disability premium. If you look halfway down the screen, we've got severe disability premium, 8 types. Yeah, there you go, George. Thank you. Yeah, and that, yeah, and so because it is a relatively small number, we just highlighted those straight away, especially when it could be worth, you know, that £2,500 per month in extra income. And by the nature of what they are applying for, all the money that they could need, all the money they have would obviously help in their situation. Moving forward, we're along with policy and practice and a few other practitioners who are involved with policy and practice, we're going to start looking at pension credits, which is 1,148. I don't think we're going to do the full amount, but what we're going to target is the over 75s that are also eligible for TV license. And so that figure is 756. Thank you. So so we're going to start targeting those in the very near future in order to help get them as much as we can in terms of pension credits. And then I'll pass back to Jane in terms of our approach for how we're going to do that.
Okay, so our approach, when we first got the dashboard, one of the most crucial things we decided on when we decided to get the dashboard was that we needed some resources within our team to be able to process the results and do something with it. Very well aware that in the past we had purchased software, but the results that came from it we weren't able to process and use in the full way that we wanted to. So when we purchased the dashboard, at the same time, I put in a funding request for an additional officer, and we recruited one officer who is currently recruited until June, but we have got funding and I'm expecting that to carry on. She is a fully trained benefits officer. She actually works from home. She doesn't come into the office, and it has been her job to work on the lists that we have provided her from the dashboard. So the first thing that when she got the first list was to understand the data that she had received and to work out a really formula for approaching the customers in a sensible way. So the first thing she decided to do was to review the claim. So she went through all the claims, made sure that she understood the detail, made sure that everything on the claim on the processing system was correct, and then she started phoning them. As Nick's already mentioned, the data protection issues that I know some authorities have come up against, I can honestly say we haven't come up against any of those at all. We haven't had any complaints from customers with regards to us calling them. And I think that is down to the way in which we approach it. There is a slide coming up on the vulnerability work that we have done, and that has really gone hand in hand with our approach to the use of the Lift dashboard, because the customers that we are talking to, some of them are extremely vulnerable, and it isn't just a simple case of calling them up and having a conversation and asking them to go online and complete a form. For many of them, that isn't an option that they can make use of. At the same time as buying the dashboard, we bought the benefit and budgeting calculator, and we encourage customers to use that when we contact them. We use it if they're completing a form. We help them to complete forms. We help them to use the calculator. All that's done in one phone call from our dedicated officer. As part of the work that she did, we identified that many people in receipt of housing benefit and universal credit didn't know anything about DHP. They were completely unaware of it. So although they were interested in her phone call, they wanted to know more. So we could point them to government websites, but we decided to create a flyer that we could send to people, or more normally we would email it to people, which gave them details of what DHP is all about, pointed them to the website and pointed them to the application form. As part of this, we also had an added bonus in which we spotted some fraud cases. That wasn't something we thought was going to happen from doing this exercise, but we spotted 2 fraud cases which are actually still with our fraud officer at the moment, where we suspected that single claimants were not actually single anymore. So that was something we didn't expect, but it is something we do target fraud and we are very aware of it. So that was an interesting outcome. So I mentioned vulnerability. This has been a complete change of culture in our authority, not just from a benefit angle, but very much from a revenues collection angle. We worked with the Money Advice Trust on this, and they came in and did some consultation with us in April last year. And we realised very quickly that we actually didn't know very much, which was a bit of a shock to us. But we've now got a vulnerability team. There are 6 people within the team. And we've started to see vulnerability in so many areas and in the things that we do. We have changed the wording on our recovery notices. So rather than just demanding money, we're now asking people to contact us and asking them what help they need and what support they need to enable them to make payment. Identifying the vulnerable customers, we do that largely over the telephone, but also when we receive applications for benefits, when we receive applications for financial support with their council tax or from a DHP application. We have identified an awful lot of customers who need a different approach to the way in which we communicate with them. Very simply, they were vulnerable in as much as when we wanted to talk to them, they weren't in a position to talk to us. Could be because they needed a carer with them at the time, or it could be that they were on medication, which meant they couldn't speak to us easily in the morning, or that indeed we just needed to be aware of the third party, their power of attorney or their appointee, which we didn't actually know. Some people, they won't answer the telephone, so those people like to have an email to say that we will call at a certain date. And all these things we are now noting on our system. We obviously have to obtain explicit consent for them to do that, but we explain it to customers in a way to say that if they tell us all about their circumstances now, we will note that on the system. So if they need to talk to us again, they don't have to go through it again. Anybody in customer services or the revenues and benefits team that talks to that customer is aware that they have a need which may not be the norm. So it does help us in making communication to those customers. We do have 2 welfare officers. I appointed a new one yesterday. Again, this is something which we've identified as a requirement, and it is for those people who need that little bit more support. The low take-up of benefits we've discovered from doing this work can be attributed in a number of cases to the fact that people can't simply go online. They can't read and write, and those people tend to stick their heads in the sand. They get very angry with us because they don't understand, and we needed to take steps to understand them and their needs. And up until we went through all of this, we did it, but not in a very clear way that we do it now. We have created a signposting list to help our customers. It's got tabs on the bottom of it. So if a customer, their problem is addiction, their problem is a bereavement, their problem is debt, their problem is that they are going through any sort of crisis in their life, then the staff can go onto the signposting list and look at an organisation that may be able to help them. We can't insist on it, but a lot of customers, and I've spoken to them myself, when you ask them what support they are getting for the problems that they have, they inevitably say not a lot, or they don't know where to go, or they don't know that there's anything out there. So it's really encouraging the feedback that we are getting from customers. So it's a tough job to do, to talk to people in these circumstances, and some of the people we talk to, their circumstances are distressing. It's distressing for staff, and I can't imagine what it's like for them. But the feedback we're getting from those customers definitely helps us and drives us to go forward and do more. So what's next for us? As Nick mentioned, the pension credits, that is our next target, and we will be doing those that are eligible for the free TV licence, the 756 cases. They will be going to our dedicated resource officer in the next week or so. At the moment, our approach is to make an initial phone call to them and invite them to claim through the DirectGov website. If we don't make contact with them on that initial phone call, we will send them an email to advise them that pension credit is available, and again provide the links and why we are contacting them to say that they may be eligible. If we can email them, that's what we will do. If not, we will do a letter. If we identify throughout the whole process that there are any unusual circumstances that we need to look at, that could be down to the vulnerability of the customers, or it could be down to fraud, then we will look at those in a slightly different way. And if we think those customers may benefit from a visit, we are fortunate at our authority, we do still have visiting officers, but we will also pass those to the welfare officers, who may make an appointment either for them to come into the office or for us to go out to their homes and speak to them. So now passing back to George and Janet. If there's any questions that you want to pose to us, then please do so. We'll be more than happy to answer.
Brilliant, thanks Jane. And I can say that there have been lots of very interested people on the webinar, lots of questions that have come through. So I'm quite conscious of time, and I do want to leave time for those questions. So I'm going to very quickly move on to our next poll and serve that very quickly so that we can move on. So this poll is asking you to tell us what's your biggest challenge when implementing take-up activity right now. So there are 5 options here. I appreciate that there may be more, but these are the 5 that we've come up with. So so would you say that in your organisation that your biggest challenge to implement take-up activity, similar to Jane and Nick, is a cultural willingness to try new ideas? Is it more likely to be ineffective working across teams, so sort of silo working? Is it more likely lack of resources, so for example people, time and money? Is it a lack of insights from your data, so there are just too many people to help, don't know where to start? Or is it proving it works? So some interesting votes coming in. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll just leave it a tiny bit longer. As I say, there may well be other reasons more so than what is on here. So apologies if your main reason isn't here. But I can see some quite strong results. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results on screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see them now. So what we find is that 7% of you say that the cultural willingness to try new ideas is the main barrier. 14% say ineffective working across teams, so that's kind of silo working. The vast majority, 56% of you, say lack of resources, people, time and money is the biggest barrier to take-up activity. 17% lack of data, insights, and 6% proving it works. Very interesting results. Jane and Nick, what would you say to those poll results?
I would say that I expected to see the lack of resource one to be the highest. That was definitely our position before we started. I suppose we have been very fortunate in that we have got funding from the County Council, and we use some of the funding from DWP for that. But what I think I would say is that most authorities currently do something, even if it is just a simple benefit review. But by doing something simple, you target everybody. So I think, as I said, if you've got a list of 500 customers and you target all 500 and you start off at number 1, it may be customer number 430 that is the one that needs your help the most. So by the time you've got to that one, if indeed you ever get there, you've lost the ability to give that customer the help, the support and the finances that they need, which allows you to do a better job and is a better job for the authority and is more value to the authority. So having the resource is very difficult, and I get that a lot of authorities don't have that. But I do feel that there are small ways that people can make some headway into that. If they've got the dashboard, the targeting is crucial. And I think by targeting it and making it in manageable chunks, it is a lot easier to be able to do something. We don't feel that we'll ever get to a stage where we can do everything, but in small chunks, we feel we're going to be able to make a difference.
Brilliant. We've got some more questions around that business case a point later, which I'll come on to. So if I may, I think at this point, I am going to hand over to George, and we will do the some demos, just talk a little bit about the software. So George, I think I'm handing over to you right now. Just bear with me a second, please. Okay.
Janet, do you want to hand over when we do the demo? And I'm happy for you to go through the slides now.
Okay, can do. Perfect. Right. Over to you, George. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. And thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jane. So just following up on what you guys had mentioned about the idea of targeting and making manageable chunks to target your households. I'm just going to run through the low income tracker, the LIFT dashboard, and how that's used to do that, and how you can use the calculator to engage on not just DWP benefits, but additional benefits too. So the whole purpose of the dashboard and the calculator really is to identify who needs help, what form of help you can offer them, and why they might be in that position. Is it a impact from a policy reform? Is it transition to UC? What is it that's causing them to be in the position they're in? And then engaging with them, so using a calculator like ours, where you've got built-in eligibility, and then you can test new and future scenarios too. And then tracking the impact and the effectiveness of your intervention. So did this work when we implemented our campaign? So this is the first screen you would see on the LIFT dashboard. I'll run through this relatively quickly, but I just wanted to highlight it because it's not just benefits take-up we can look at here. As Jane mentioned, you can look at DHPs, so how you're allocating them, what percentage you might have left to allocate. We also have pages on impact of welfare reform and transition to universal credit too. So there are other options here for how you might identify those who need help and create a cohort to engage with. But we'll carry on through the benefits take up, and this is similar to the screen that Nick showed you, but I've highlighted here the pension credit area where we've got a cohort of almost 3,000. So this is a little large at the moment, and in a second I'll show you how we could break that down. But you'll see the financial breakdown here that again Nick had sort of gone through. You've got almost £1.3 million worth of extra income available per month for these 3,000 households. So it's a huge amount. It's almost £450 a month per household that we could be maximising their income really. And then on the right hand side you'll see the additional benefits. So these are the ones that are easily forgotten actually, and they're not your sort of core DWP benefits, but they're very important. You've got almost 31,000 households who are eligible for Warm Homes discount that might not be claiming, and as I've highlighted here, just because we've sort of touched on it, is the Healthy Start programme. You've got over 3,000 households who could be claiming the Healthy Start programme. So these are children effectively who could be claiming an award to help them buy food and milk, etc. So like I say, this number's a little big, the 3,000, so we'll have a look at how we can break that down using the LIFT dashboard. So you'll see here I've highlighted a few boxes that show how we've broken our 3,000 down to a closer number of 153. So we've applied our financial resilience bandings. So Nick mentioned before they had a household who was at risk and they'd help to move on. So here I've just included those who are struggling, at risk and in crisis. To the right of that, I've included those who are in council tax arrears as well. So we're breaking this down onto those who, as Jane sort of mentioned, your 400 person who needs the help the most. So we're trying to break down to who really needs that help right now, and those in relative poverty as well. So that gives us a household amount of 153, which is probably far more manageable. And at this point, maybe you're looking at a calling engagement program rather than a mail shot. And maybe more manageable for tracking the outcomes as well. So once we've got our cohort, this is when we can start to look at that, that tracking element. So here you'll see we've got our 153 households have been put into the LIFT dashboard tracker. The key thing here is that we can track their progress from at risk into coping. So you'll see where I've highlighted January in a little red box. That's our implementation of our program. At this point, we started to engage with our households, with our cohort. And you can see how some of those households have transitioned from at risk into coping. Now, if we wanted, we could change this as well. If we were working on a program where we were trying to get people from out of work into work, we could change that and base it around general take up as well. But it's a good way. I think some of the questions were, how do we prove that it's worked? This is a good way to prove that. You know, we've moved houses from at risk to coping, and that's even if it's a handful, that's a big thing to achieve. But we can drill down slightly more. So if we roll on to the next slide, we can see here the household breakdown. So this is where we can get an idea of how exactly is this household being impacted. So I think in the interest of time, I'll sort of just concentrate on one element here. This blue line you'll see at the top, the income line that's moving from left to right. So you'll see a sharp decline around the middle of 2018. And then just below that in our events section, you can see what caused this decline. So their tenure has moved from social tenant to owner occupier. So the chances are they've also lost their housing benefit. So that could be where this sharp decline in incomes come from. But if we were running a take-up campaign on benefits, this is where we could see, okay, they've taken up this benefit. How has that changed their income? And you can see on a household level how you're impacting these households, as well as using the tracker to look at that at a cohort size. So I think this brings us onto the calculator, because this is where we've identified someone who needs to maximize their income. So the idea is we can use the calculator that's got eligibility built in for those additional benefits and the core DWP benefits, and we can maximize their income that way. So I'll give you a quick demonstration of that. If Janet, you'd like to hand over the reins.
Yeah, indeed. That should be with you now.
Okay, brilliant. So hopefully now you can all see my screen, and this hopefully looks familiar to quite a few of you as well. I know it will to Jane and Nick, the benefit and budgeting calculator. So we'll scroll through the first part of the calculator relatively quickly. We've got our household details, relatively straightforward, your name, relationship status, postcode, date of birth, and so on. And what we'll do is we'll get down to the area of who's in your household. So for this household, we'll put in one child, because we're trying to activate the Healthy Start program and the additional benefits. So we've got one child who's been born recently. We've put in here February 4th, and we'll carry on down. If we wanted to, and I'm sure you often do have more complex cases, we've got options here for disability and illness, which will bring up questions about limited capability for work, DLA, and so on. And as we'll see to become more important, I'm sure, questions here about non-UK nationals, and then we have student questions as well. But we'll carry on, we'll keep it a simple case and move on to the property details. So previously we'd input the postcode, which automatically produces a local council. So in this case it's St Albans. If it had been Folkestone and Hythe postcode, that would say Folkestone and Hythe. And we'll scroll down, and because we've automatically populated the St Albans local council, we've also automatically populated the LHA rate for this household type. So we know that's around £908, so I've popped that in the rent here. If I carry on down slightly, I've got the council tax section as well. And again, because we know that this is a household in St Albans Local Council, we've automatically populated the council tax liability. It's worth noting, you've probably noticed as well, boxes popping up on the screen. These are our tooltips. So you don't have to be a policy expert to use this calculator at all. We've got the tooltips on the side. That's a contribution of not only our policy expert knowledge, but contributions from the DWP and Citizens Advice Bureau in there. And this gives you an idea of what needs to go in these boxes and what the policy is to help guide you if you're not sure if you are eligible or if you should be putting in certain parts of the calculator. So we'll carry on to the income, and then we're just a couple of steps away from looking at how we can maximize their income. And we've got questions about are they in work. So here we could have yes or no, and again for self-employed, yes or no, and that will populate more questions on things such as the minimum income floor. But for this case, we'll keep them as not self-employed, and we've put in a weekly wage. You'll see the payment cycle here is weekly, and a weekly wage of £80, working 10 hours a week. So we'll carry on. Now we'll skip straight to the results, and we'll have a look at how we can maximise their income. So when we go on to our results, we'll jump on the universal credit. We've got a little note here that highlights any claim would have to be for universal credit. And we can see their UC amount. We can take a breakdown of that. And if we wanted, click the blue apply button. That'll take you to the government website to apply. But what I want to highlight is on this right-hand side, advice and support. So this is where we're talking about the additional benefits, your £3.10 a week for the Healthy Start programme, your NHS free prescriptions, that although it's small packages can make quite a big difference. So we'll click information about your case, and that will bring those up. So for this case, we should expect to see the Healthy Start programme. So we've got our food vouchers there. So that gives a bit of information about why you'd be eligible and how much you'll be eligible for. And as Louise had noted previously, if we'd had this case as someone in Scotland, this wouldn't say Healthy Start programme, it would say Best Start Food Grants Scotland. So these are not generic additional benefits that we put in here. These are bespoke to the case that you've entered. And what's good here is, like I say, these additional benefits are often forgotten because there's so many of them. No one expects you to remember all of them. So this way you put in the customer's information, we generate exactly what they are eligible for. So it's not just food vouchers though, we've also got free prescriptions. Like we saw earlier, there was 30,000 people in our demo lift case that were eligible for Warm Homes discount, and we've got that in there as well. So these are three areas where they could be making savings, and as well we've got some pointers about how they're over the LHA rate and they're in shortfall, and it's a collective group that helps to maximise their income overall. So on that note, I think I'll pass back to you, Janet, to carry on with the slides, and we'll just get into the last couple of points.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, George. Lots to go through there. And indeed, there will be chance at the end to request more time to look at it. So I think, George, you were going to talk to us about some successful take-up campaigns.
Yeah, I'll briefly go over these just in the interest of time, and as the folks in Hive guys have spoken about their successes, but I think it's worth noting a couple of others. Croydon, I just want to mention, as they were working on the Healthy Start programme, and they almost had a take-up rate of 40% of the cohort that they contacted. And in terms of income, that was over £70,000 worth of income generated for these houses over the year. But more importantly, we're talking about nutrients for children there in almost 400 households. The Guinness partnership, so they use the calculator extremely well. They've used it to maximise income for their clients as well. So they've identified over £200,000 worth of unclaimed SDP through the calculator. So it's not just the dashboard where you can be maximising income and increasing people's income. And then lastly, you've got the Royal Borough of Greenwich. So they identified up to £20 million in unclaimed benefits through the Lift dashboard. So that's a huge amount. And then that also had the additional impact of reducing reliance on food banks. I think it was 20% of their low-income families were using food banks, and that's moved down to closer to about 1%. So it's a huge bonus in that sense. So this is the last slide, and I think this helps to answer some of the sort of concerns. I think it's 56% of people said that they were concerned about resources and sort of, well, the return on investment, the value of these sorts of programs. So what we've got here is we've got our cohort size. So this return on investment is built on basically a conservative estimate based on previous campaigns. So we're using a cohort size, which is the one I showed you earlier, of around 3,000 people on pension credit. And all of those have been identified through the Lift dashboard. So from that, we've got our campaign size. So these are the people whose information you have. Like Nick said, he had a handful of people whose mobile numbers they didn't have or couldn't contact anymore. So these are the people you can actually get through to. So from that, you might actually get engagement from, say, how we've calculated this, around 540 people. So those are the ones who come back to you positively. They've seen your email, they've responded to your call, and they want to progress. And then carrying on to the final stage, and you can track this through the Lift dashboard, who has taken up pension credit. So in this case, and like I say, this is based on a conservative estimate of previous programs. So for Folkestone and Hive, I think their take up was actually, well, it was far better than we estimate, but we've got a take up of 181 households. So in terms of the financial return on investment there, you're looking at, as I mentioned before, you've got £463 worth of pension credit a month for these households. So we're timesing that by 12 for the annual amount and timesing it by the households who have taken it up. So that's coming to around £1 million worth of funds that weren't being claimed by these households that now are over the year. But obviously that's the key element there, is that's tackling that sort of concern around resources. Realistically, the biggest return on investment here is the investment in the people, and that they have now maximised their income and they can be in a better situation. But I think it helps just when you're looking at justifying the engagement programs and those concerns about resources. Hopefully this gives you an idea of how well they do work.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, George. That was excellent. I'm very conscious of time, and I did say I would like to bring back Jane and Nick, because we do have some interesting questions. And just picking up on the point there about return on investment. With budgets under pressure, how did Jane and Nick, with budgets under pressure, how did you get approval to buy your Lift dashboard internally? Some questions, various different questions have asked about the business case. You know, how did you actually manage to secure approval? What did you do? Any tips?
It's a bit of a strange one, really, because we'd seen it, we demonstrated it to the people that would make the decision whether or not they would fund it. And I suppose for us, the biggest one was we did have the funding available, so I didn't have to work too hard to get it. That's really our simple answer. We didn't have to do a big business case or anything like that. They said as long as we used it, we could show some returns on what we were doing. They were happy to support us in having it for 2 years. We had the money already, so that was really in our favour.
And I mentioned, I remember when we spoke before the webinar, Jane, that you were talking about other teams using the dashboard and how that was helpful in that conversation to secure those funds.
Yes, we bought it for revenues and benefits. We've identified clearly there's a lot of use that housing could make of it. And our task going forward from April is to engage with the housing team, the homelessness sections and housing options on the use of the dashboard so they can make use of it. Because obviously once our 2-year funding has bought the dashboard and run out, we are then want to carry on with it. Whether or not we are in a position to fund it is unknown at the moment, but we feel that if we can offer it out to other departments, they can contribute to the cost of keeping it going. So that is something which we're starting in April, and we're hopeful that they will see the benefits of using it. They do already have money advisors and sustainment officers, so they will be able to make use of those officers in helping them to target the customers that really do need their help. So I'm quite confident that they will be able to chip in next year. We know that it's something we're going to have to budget for, so throughout our budget process next year we will have this in mind so that we have got the funding available when we need it.
Excellent, thank you. Just another question here, Jane, I suppose similar lines really, but did you have to have extra resource to make the best use of the dashboard? Just picking up that point about your people in your team, or was this a result of the impact it had that gave you the reason to go and ask for the extra resource?
When we purchased it, it was my decision really that I wanted a dedicated officer to work on the dashboard lists that came from it, because I felt that that was going to be the best way that we could get most out of it. When we did the first campaign, as Nick said, we used 3 officers. To be honest, we didn't need them a lot of the time. It was a couple of afternoons a week out of their day. We are quite fortunate as an authority that our team works extremely well. We are relatively up to date. We don't have a backlog. That's not to say that we wouldn't go into a backlog situation at any time. But purchasing the dashboard for me meant getting that resource at the same time. I felt that was important because I needed to prove to the powers that be here the value of using the dashboard, so that going forward they would support us having resources to deal with it. Whereas if we bought it, didn't have the resource and weren't able to make good use of it, going forward in the long term, they wouldn't be so keen to support us in maintaining the resources that we need to make the most effective use.
Excellent. Like I say, we do have an awful lot of questions, but I'm very conscious of time as well. So if I may end on this question for yourself, Jane and Nick, for other people on the call that that might be sort of thinking about buying, but having just considering buying the Lift dashboard or want to do take-up campaigns, what advice would you give to other organisations who want to increase benefit take-up?
Start small. The dashboard, by breaking it down into small chunks, makes it a lot easier, and you can see the results quicker. So that kind of spurs the team on. If you've got a huge list, my experience says you very rarely get to the end of it. People do get tired of working on a long list, and the results aren't immediate. By breaking it down into small chunks and using the tracking that George was talking about, it allows you to see the outcome very quickly of what you're doing. The feedback from customers is, I mean, my team absolutely love the compliments they get from the customers, and there is a real buzz about this kind of work that we're doing now that wasn't there before. So I'd say start small, work on the concept that you want, the way you want to do it, because that is quite important, and make sure that your staff are well prepared for some of the distressing calls that they will need to take, and give them the confidence to have those difficult conversations with customers, because we have discovered that it's not always easy to talk to some of these people. They've had quite challenging lives, and talking to them can also be a challenge. So that shouldn't be forgotten in anything that you're planning to do.
Okay, great advice. Thank you very much, Jane and Nick. I think anybody with questions that we haven't answered over the course of the webinar, we will pick up with you separately after the webinar and get the answers to you. Jane and Nick have agreed that they will do that. So thank you very much. So just moving now to the end of our webinar, just like to point you to some next steps, if I may. So in this panel on the right hand side, you will see that you can download a number of different things. So there's more information about the Lift dashboard, and also the benefit and budgeting calculator, and the 2 flyers that are there, and also more information on the 3 case studies that George very briefly talked about, Greenwich, Croydon and Guinness. You can download those case studies there. There will be a follow-up email with a recording of this webinar and all the slides and links as well, so look out for that in the next day or two. And also, just as we finish the webinar, if you could just hang on the line, because there is a short survey and we would really value your feedback. It gives you the opportunity to ask further questions of Jane and Nick as well, and like I say, they're going to get answers to you. You can find out more about the Lift and the benefit and budgeting calculator and request a look yourself, so you can have a look around in your own time with your own colleagues. And also sign up for our next webinar, which is going to be with Cheltenham Borough Homes at the end of March, talking about illegal money lending, tackling illegal money lending. And also, if I could just raise as well that we have a face-to-face event coming up in Leeds, is our first one, a regional data analysis forum, where we're going to be talking face-to-face about the campaigns, like Folkestone's today. So there's going to be more information about that in the follow-up email as well. And that Leeds event is on the 31st of March, with more to come throughout the country throughout the rest of the year. So with that, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. But most, I'd like to say thank you to Jane and to Nick for joining us today and talking through the big successes that Folkestone and Hythe Council have achieved. We're delighted to have you here, and I'd like to say very big well done for all of your successes to date. And also thank you to my colleagues Louise and George for talking through their bits as well. That leaves me to say thank you very much for joining, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks everybody, take care. Bye bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Janet. Bye.
Bye bye.